So, hello, BookTube. This is my TBR. It's about 16 books, so it's a very doable one. I tend not to allow my TBR to get too long because then I end up postponing books for so long, Later, I'll get to that book. And then my tastes just change. And then suddenly I have to rethink my TBR, rethink my life choices, have an existential crisis, all of that. And we can't be doing that. So 16 books is very doable. I'm not promising that I'm going to finish this by the end of 2026. I don't put that kind of pressure on myself because I do a lot of reading for my profession. I am a lawyer. And so if there's this urgent class action lawsuit and I have to overhaul everything on my TBR and focus on that, that's totally fine. For me, that's what's important to me. It's the air that I breathe. So my curiosity about these books, I can just shelve them for a short while. These books are either ebooks that are loaded onto my phone, audiobooks on my phone. This is my physical TBR, things that my friends have lent me, some books from local bookshops where there are new releases and they're obviously not going anywhere, they're not going out of print. Also, some books from my local library that are interesting and that I will take out, but I do have to just sort out the administrative process about my library card. I just need to submit my documentation again because you just have to renew that every couple years within South Africa. So the first book is The Red Book by Carl Jung, and this documents Jung's confrontation with the unconscious through visions, symbols, and dialogues that blur the lines between psychology, mythology, and spiritual experience. So it's funny that this is on my TBR now because so I'm 28, just to give some context, and I first became interested in psychology at about the age of 14 and 15. This is when I became explicitly interested. So I was exposed to human psychology obviously through consuming, movies and stories and things like that. But psychoanalysis became interesting to me. I read a little bit of Freud, didn't really click with me. And I stayed very far away from Carl Jung because it felt a little bit too mystic for me. And I was raised Hindu, so anything mystical, anything religious, anything spiritual, I was just not interested. Hinduism, at least from my lived experience, is very nebulous about defining anything. What about its symbolism, about the rituals, the history is also very nebulous. And for me, that was always used as a way, these shifting goalposts was used as a way to exert power. It's a way to practice patriarchy, prejudice, discrimination, colorism, casteism, all of these things. And I was just not interested. So I think it's quite a common thing for people to reject religious dogma and then suddenly find their way to spirituality later in life. And I think that's exactly what happened with me. When I was 16, I struggled very much with anxiety and panic attacks, and so I read somewhere that if you do meditation, it will help you. That's what I did. I did meditation, found it very effective, but that's kind of where my curiosity ended. I thought, okay, great, meditation works. It didn't occur to me to look into the philosophy of meditation, where does it come from, the history, the spirituality behind meditation. I was not interested. It worked. I've got no more panic attacks. Done. And then I just moved on. 10 years later, I joined a Buddhist sort of meditation community, spiritual community, found them to be a little bit cult-like, left. But now I'm a lot more receptive to anything spiritual and anything mystical. So so we've got The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung, we've got Memories, Dreams, Reflections by Carl Jung, so that's one that I'm currently reading at the moment. And Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he writes similar to Marcel Proust. Now I haven't read Proust in a very long time, so I have kind of forgotten, but he shows what it's like to be a child. There's so little that you know and that you can verbalize for certain with empirical evidence, but there's a lot that you know in terms of intuitive knowing, in terms of this connection with the collective unconscious, and this veil between your concrete reality and the collective unconscious is a very thin veil when you're a child. So again, I just find his writing to be very vivid and fascinating, actually. The next one is called Steering the Craft by Ursula K. Le Guin, and I've just seen quotes from her about the commodification of modern fantasy and how it's looking for easy answers in terms of morality. It's looking for simplistic answers, which she very much disagrees with. She believes that the point of art is to make us interrogate ourselves. You don't have to bully other people. You don't have to be horrible, but look at your own belief system and your own morality. That's an important philosophical thing to be engaging in. And I just so much agreed with her and her quotes. And I actually haven't read fantasy in a very long time. exactly because of the things that she's saying. Modern fantasy, there's a lot of misogyny. There's, just to use an example, Stephanie Meyer and Twilight was huge when I was more like a preteen actually. I wasn't even a teenager. And I know it's urban fantasy, so it is different from high fantasy, but that Stephanie Meyer's Mormonism very much seeped in. Brandon Sanderson is also Mormon, so I'm just not interested in reading his books because cruelty against women is not a plot point. It's not fun. It doesn't make your books relevant or interesting. It just makes them cruel in a lot of ways. Like, why did you need to have that violence? Was it necessary for the plot? Most of the time, no. So, something like Ursula K. Le Guin, her sensitivity towards writing is just why I got into it. And I think I'm not sure if I'm now going to go and read her fantasy later on, because someone like Stephen King, I actually read On Writing by Stephen King before I read his fiction, and I just found his nonfiction to be so much more interesting. So yeah, I gravitate a lot more towards nonfiction personally, and maybe that's just who I am, and that's okay. So the next one, which is funny because the next one is a fiction book, and it's called Eight Lives of a Century-Old Trickster. This is by Mirinae Lee. It's intergenerational trauma, women's experiences, war, international conflicts, and the lived experiences of the people that are caught in that crossfire. So this is from one of the awards. Man Booker International, Women's Prize for Fiction, Woman in Translation, I don't know which one. But yeah, I looked at the Man Booker International for 2026, looked at it, thought, this award this year is rather boring, and I'm just not going to read any of the books on it. And it's not to say that the authors are boring and the subject matter mustn't exist or anything like that. It's just that it's not my specific interest. So I am South African. I tend to take an interest in the African continent purely because I need to educate myself. So if you are in a South African classroom in a public school in an English class, you're going to be reading American fiction, UK fiction. There's nothing wrong with that. That fiction is perfectly fantastic. There's excellent writers, excellent voices. My concern, however, is that we as Africans are not going to have a literary imprint on the world if we don't lift each other up from within the continent. I mean, if we don't even do that from within the continent, who outside of the continent is going to be interested? So I personally believe in highlighting African fiction within my own reading, and so that's what I gravitate towards. But you can see from my face, from my name, I'm ethnically Indian. So actually that's going to come in later in the TBR, so you can just wait a little bit. But yes, Mirinae Lee. So I do also very much gravitate towards Asian women and writing about intergenerational trauma because I very much resonate with a lot of those experiences. So the next two are nonfiction. This one is called Work It Out by Fiona Thomas, and The Portfolio Life by Christina Wallace. And it's about crafting your career in a way that makes sense to you, in a way that's personal to you. So my fiance has ADD, and he's essentially crafted his entire work life around that. There's certain things that he simply would not be able to sit at an office for 8 hours, commute, these kinds of things. It's just not the way that he's built, and he's made peace with that. I think there's a lot of ways where I beat myself up and I wish that I could be like someone else. And I mean, what's the point of that, really? Are you being a productive member of society when you're busy self-flagellating? Is it even helpful to be self-flagellating? I'm using like a capitalist mindset to stop myself from self-flagellating. Anyway, let's just move on. The next one is this The Saffron Road, A Journey with Buddha's Daughters, and this is by Christine Toomey. Buddhism, and I've gotten more interested in it with time. The way that people portray it is a very male-dominated way, which that's not unique to Buddhism. Like in the Abrahamic religions, there's just such an excessive focus on men. Sometimes they don't know how loud they're being. They don't know how to keep quiet. They don't know how to not center their own experience, And again, it's not to say that men's stories are not important. They are important. But if you don't seek out women's stories, you're generally not going to find women's stories. They're going to be more buried, more silenced. They're going to be described as a niche, Women's fiction is niche. men's fiction is viewed as universal. The Secret Lives of the Dalai Lama by Alexander Norman. And again, I just find this concept of the position of Dalai Lama to be an interesting position, and just the history of that, and this figurehead that's traversing politics and religion and spirituality. It's maybe similar to a Catholic pope, I suppose, but at the same time, the Dalai Lama, there has been a separation between like Buddhism and state, like forever. There wasn't really a Buddhist state, if you can call it that. So again, it's just an interesting position, and it's interesting to see how it has changed throughout time. Who is messaging me? Oh, okay. Um, Biographies and Teachings of Milarepa, and this is by Francis V. Tiso. I've learned about Milarepa, but only from the perspective of Geshe Kelsong Gyatso Rinpoche. And he, again, his Geshe degree was taken away because he abused it in many ways. So again, the books that I have read are distorted. So I would like to get to know Milarepa more on his own terms. This next one is like more of a textbook, but it's called Environmental Ethics, and it's by Robin Attfield. I'm very interested in, so ever since I was a child, I loved my National Geographic magazines. I would stick up the posters everywhere of like the NASA telescope visions and what Mars looked like, and the, what do you call them, like nebulae and the stars, and just the environment around me I found to be so fascinating. Things like marine biology, things like evolution. You know, every child must be obsessed with dinosaurs for a couple years, and I just loved that. I later would study things like physics, chemistry, and biology in school. I started a pharmacy degree. I loved like the life sciences elements of it. I loved being in the lab. Even dissections of animals, I wasn't really squeamish, like I wasn't put off that, but at the same time I did feel that pharmacy was not the world for me. But you know, the more you learn about science and the more time you spend in these labs and things, you see how much science there is about climate change, and how, you know, when I was first studying pharmacy, there were a lot of politicians who were just outright denying that climate change even existed or that it was an issue. So my thought process was, okay, then we don't need more science. We need people to actually listen to the scientists. What is the sociology behind climate change denialism? What is the psychology of this denialism? Why? So it led me to zoom out and ask a lot of questions about economics, and again, what leads to this denial of science when the science is so manifest. So now that I'm a lawyer, I would really love to combine those two worlds of science and me supporting scientists and supporting their endeavors. And, you know, as the world gets worse, I suppose is the way to put it, important scientific research is being defunded. The arts are being defunded. Everything is being defunded. You know what's the one thing that's being funded? Is war. Why? Destruction, calamity. That's what's being funded. So for me, I think, I don't know that I will necessarily become an environmental lawyer. I don't know. Is there space for that in South Africa? I don't know. But it's definitely something I'm curious about. It's something that I would love to be more educated on, and see if there's any way that I can slot in within that space. This next one is called Inside Indian Indenture, a South African story, 1860 to 1914, and this is by Ashwin, Desai, and Goolam Vahed. They are the two, I don't know, loudest scholars within South African Indian indenture and just dealing with that. I don't know, anytime I see their names, I'm a bit less interested, because they are very interested in the caste denialism, the Gandhi worship, that kind of thing, which it's just historically untrue. It's just historically inaccurate. So I'm not going to go too much into that. But look, I am someone... Wait, did I even count these books? Okay, so I've got some physical books here. My family was brought here to South Africa through British colonial rule. So India was called the British Raj at that time, and they needed labor within South Africa to foster sugarcane plantations, to create railroads, to work in mines, to work in the military as well. So you would get, black and brown people in mining, black and brown people in the military, to essentially be a cheap labor force, so to speak. So that's where a lot of my family history comes from. Some of the Indian community in South Africa are settlers, so specifically Gujarati Muslim people. Historically, they have come as settlers. However, they do, what's the word, appropriate the struggle of indentured people for the purposes of modern day affirmative action. So there's a lot of exploitation that happens within the Indian community and division within the Indian community, which Ashwin Desai is very interested in suppressing the truth, if I can just put it that way, which is sad, really. This next one is the English IsiZulu Legal Dictionary and Thesaurus by Kat Phewa. This dictionary is unparalleled. I already work within law, and I really need to know a lot more of the Zulu terminology so that I can explain things to other people. And I think I would love to cross that language barrier. However, my schools, it was like 300 students and you'd get one IsiZulu teacher if you were lucky. So my level of Afrikaans far exceeded my level of IsiZulu at a very young age. We were learning Afrikaans every day and Zulu every week if we were lucky. And so the Zulu we were learning is maybe simple greetings, counting to 10, grocery lists. The syllabus was repetitive at times. We didn't progress much. So I never really had that opportunity. Within my 2 university degrees that I studied, IsiZulu was not a requirement. When I was doing my articles of clerkship and working, the company that I worked in, IsiZulu, was not really a requirement. It was not necessary. I didn't have the access to training. So at this point in time, it's just something where I really need to self-educate. Not really sure where to begin, but I'm just trying. I'm just going for it. There are apps as well to learn IsiZulu and, African languages, but some of them are only available on iPhone. Anyway. This next one is also about environmental ethics and greening the South African economy, scoping the issues, challenges, and opportunities. And this is edited by Mark Swilling, Josephine Kaviti Musango, and Jeremy Wakeford. Again, economics plays into these environmental issues. There's a lot of things where, people have this like DIY, when you're doing organic farming and you can avoid pesticides like this, and some things you can do within your own personal veggie garden at home, but it's not scalable. It's not doable on a larger economic scale. So we really have to consider these kinds of things when we are proposing environmental solutions. It can't just be something that one person can do in their household, or that only the wealthy have the access to do things that are environmentally friendly. We need to make environmental movements scalable. So again, it's all of these considerations. It's not quite as simple as, just recycle and the ozone layer is going to rebuild itself. It doesn't really work like that. So again, I'm just really interested in not the science, not like you need to tell me that climate change exists. But what can we do as citizens about it? What does that science say? What do the experts say? The next one is Bring Nature Back to the City, How to Conduct Urban Nature Conservation. And this is by Ernst Wallace. And it's again a similar vein. So again, I don't explicitly work in conservation, but I read all of this to know how I can support people who work in conservation. These next books are on my physical TBR. So this is The Bone Woman by Claire Koff, and it says it's a spellbinding account of the journey that transformed Claire Koff from an idealistic student into a seasoned war crimes investigator. So she was a young graduate student in 1996 when she was sent to Rwanda by the UN to work with a small team exhuming victims of the genocide. The Bone Woman is a mesmerizing account of her 4 years of grueling investigations into these and other murderous events. What she found in the Rwandan hills and in Bosnia, Croatia, and Kosovo, how it affected her, and who went to trial based on the evidence that she collected. And I think the Rwandan genocide is not something that's easy to talk about. Sorry, I'll just hold up the book so that you can see it. It's not easy to talk about. None of these things are easy to talk about, but they are so important. And so I just would like to read this and find out about the lived experience. It's not going to be an easy read, but it is important. This next one is a lot lighter. This is Garlic and Sapphires, The Secret Life of a Food Critic by Ruth Reichel. I started reading this and... Okay, so Reichel knows that to be a good critic, you have to be anonymous. When she lands the much coveted job of the New York Times restaurant critic, she resorts to disguise in order to avoid the inevitable red carpet treatment. But what is remarkable about Reichel's spy games is that as she takes on these various guises, frumpy blonde Molly, bohemian red-headed Brenda, she finds herself changed beyond her physical appearance. Ruth discovers how one's outer appearance can profoundly influence one's inner character, expectations, and appetites. And I think this, it's just so interesting, it's just so fascinating to me. I'm very interested in food politics, food anthropology, all of those kinds of things. This is sort of connected to this other book called Pole to Pole by Michael Palin. My fiance's grandparents would always read to each other before bed. So my fiance was reading this book to me and I was like bored beyond what I can even say. I don't really understand the appeal at all. So I said to him, can we just like take turns or something? Can we read something a bit more interesting? Garlic and Sapphires, namely. But yeah, so that's on our physical TBR, it's on our bedstand, and when we read to each other, we sort of flip between the two. This next one is on my personal bedstand, so if I just want to do something instead of scrolling, it's Seduction of the Minotaur by Anais Nin, and I just saw it secondhand somewhere. I think it was like the Cat League or something like that. I don't know, like Feral Cat Society, something like that. And I've always wanted to read Anais Nin based on the small quotes that I've seen from her. They just seem to be fascinating. So that's literally just why I picked it up. And yeah, she talks about like woman's sensuality and things like that, which it's important to write about, I would say, from the female perspective. This next one my friend gave to me yesterday and was telling me I love it. I don't know why. Because I'm not really a fiction girly, but it's called Lessons in Chemistry. It's by Bonnie Garmus, whatever you want to say. Chemist Elizabeth Zott is not your average woman. In fact, Elizabeth Zott would be the first to point out that there is no such thing. But it's the early 1960s, and her all-male team at Hastings Research Institute take a very unscientific view of equality. Forced to resign, she reluctantly signs on as the host of a cooking show, Supper at 6. But her revolutionary approach to cooking, fueled by scientific and rational commentary, grabs the attention of a nation. And soon, a legion of overlooked housewives find themselves daring to change the status quo, one molecule at a time. So, okay, well, I mean, I love cooking. I, again, struggle to even identify as a feminist, but I suppose I am. So, maybe I like it, I don't know. And even if I don't, it'll be an interesting journey. So, the last one, I'm so sorry if this video has been getting too long, but it's called Emigrant Coolie, and this is by Ranji S. Nobath. And finally, something about indentured people that's not by Ashwin Desai. That's not by Fatima Mir. Oh my god. So she again was a settler, and literally, and this is what it says in her memoir, her husband said to her, because essentially she was rich enough that she didn't need to work, husband said to her, you know, you're not very good as a housewife, like you're not good at cooking, you're not good at cleaning or anything like that, so we need to actually find you something to do that's constructive and like you add to society. You can't just sit and twiddle your thumbs at home. You're okay at like maybe you can do academia and like a little bit of community service and activism or something. And it was just essentially for her just a way to keep her busy. But that very privileged class of society is not going to understand the issues of society. They have not experienced it. They don't they specifically try to divide themselves from the other in society, you know. Those are the oppressed people. Ooh, I'm too privileged to associate with such people, you know. So yeah, Fatima Mir was writing from that standpoint of looking down upon indentured people. It seems to be very similar with Ashwin Desai. He just doesn't understand the lived experiences of formerly indentured people. So this one, okay, maybe I can just read you the blurb, because it does talk about not just South Africa, but also about other places in the world where there are Indian indentured labor because of the colonial history. So it talks about places like Mauritius, there's the Dutch Guyana, there's all over. Yeah, Australia. This is the phases of the immigration, the expansion. Trinidad and Tobago, in Jamaica, in Saint Lucia, Grenada, Saint Vincent. So obviously, Seychelles, Fiji, East Africa. Within East Africa, there was like a forced removal of formerly indentured Indian people as well. So anyway, this is just the blurb of it. Traditionally, the Indian population in South Africa has been categorized under the colonial nomenclature of coolies. So this is the servant classes, which is what I would fall under. And coolie being a Hindi word for porter, like someone who carries things, Porters, and Arabs. So they were not Arab, okay, they were generally Gujarati Muslim, but them being Muslim is why the colonial nomenclature was like Arab. So if you're Muslim, you're Arab, apparently. You have to be Arab, like there's no other types of Muslims. Anyway, the term coolie referred specifically to indentured laborers imported from the Indian subcontinent to work on Natal's sugar plantations. So yeah, it was sugar plantations, but it was a lot of other things as well. So the railways, the mines, all sorts of things, like all sorts of cheap labor within South Africa. So that's why you will find Indian communities in Johannesburg, you'll find them all over, not just the coast where there is sugar. So conversely, Arabs denoted those Indian traders, predominantly Muslim. So traders meaning like the merchant class. What do they call it in like Vaishya within the caste system? So Mohandas Gandhi was also under that trader within the caste system, within that hierarchy. That's where he would have fell. So these traders migrated subsequently as passenger Indians, financing their own passage and arriving without contractual labor obligations. Following their introduction and settlement, within a mere 2 decades, this heterogeneous community came to be perceived collectively as a singular societal problem. So there is colonial literature where they talk about the Indian problem. How do we get rid of the Indian problem within South Africa? Even though we as the colonials created this problem, we actually shipped them here. But no, but now they're the problem. This perception solidified after the first governmental commission of inquiry into the Indian presence in the 1880s, subsequently elevating the Indian question to a persistent and major political concern within South Africa. Anyway, we'll just continue this jurisprudence, morality, that kind of thing. So I'm much more interested in this book than, again, like your Fatima Mir and all of the previous scholarship, which is essentially just a waste of time. That is my TBR. So see you later. Hopefully you'll see some of these books appearing in reviews and discussions and that kind of thing on my channel. So see you next time.